Welcome to this Blender 2.8 training course. My name is Kent Trammell and I will be your instructor. But before we get started in Blender, I want to briefly discuss the goals of this course. First off, the intended audience is both beginners and experienced Blender artists. The release of Blender version 2.8 has ushered in a new era of open source 3D creation, and there's a lot of new people wanting to learn it for the first time, as well as a lot of people looking to make a smooth transition from previous versions. Therefore, this curriculum is designed to be simple enough for beginners with enough challenge for the experienced. And to that end, a treasure chest is a great project. While it's certainly a lot of fun to create, the best part is it will teach you all the essential techniques and workflow for creating with Blender 2.8 in general, meaning you can apply what you learn here to any number of things you want to build. And that's the most important thing to get out of this. So please keep that in mind as we go. And with that said, let's start modeling. We're going to be starting this project from a fresh default Blender 2.8 scene. The only things I've changed in this setup, if I go to my preferences, is in the key map settings, I've changed the spacebar action to be search instead of the default play or tools. This is from 2.7 behavior, meaning I can hit the spacebar and type in any command to find tools easier. And then I've also enabled a screencast keys add-on so that you can see what keys I'm pressing in the bottom right. That doesn't really apply to you, it's just for me as a teacher. Everything else should be completely default. Now with default Blender, you get a camera and a lamp for free. These are objects we don't really need, at least not now. And so to get rid of them, I can select them with left click, select, and then hold Shift to add to my selection by clicking another object. And then go to the object menu and choose delete, or I can use the hotkey X to delete that as well. I'm more of a hotkey person, so you'll see me tend that way, but I'll do my best to show you also in the menu where these items are found. But at this point, we're left with just the default cube, which works out perfectly. It will become the bottom half of our treasure chest. Now I want to set this on the grid as if the grid is a floor, because right now the grid is cutting through the middle of our cube. So I'm going to select that cube and then hit G for grab or move the object around. I want to lock it to the Z axis, so I hit the Z key next. Now it's just moving up and down, and then I can hit 1 on my number pad and then enter. Now this essentially served, if we do that one more time, G, Z, and 1 just moves the cube up 1 grid unit. And that essentially puts the cube directly on the floor, which is just preferentially how I like to contextualize the 3D space. And now our cube is sitting on the floor. We can start to edit this into a more rectangular shape as is appropriate for a treasure chest. So with that selected, I'm going to tab into edit mode. So you can hit the tab key to go in and out of edit mode, where we now have access to mesh vertices or edges or faces. And I can change through those, 1 being vertices, 2 being edges, 3 being faces. And those numbers are above the letter keys, not the number pad. All right, so I'll just start with vertices and then hit A to select everything and hit SX for scale in the X axis. And I'm going to type in 1.8. All right, that's scaling it horizontally 1.8 units. And I've done this several times from rehearsal, and I know that I want my Y dimensions to scale in Y 1.2. And now we're looking at the final dimensions of our treasure chest, at least the lower half of the treasure chest. And I'm going to delete this top face because I want it to appear like an empty box. So hit the 3 hotkey and then just select the top face and hit X just like in object mode to bring up our delete menu. And we have several options here. I just want to delete faces specifically. And now we're looking at an empty basic treasure chest half. Now for the top, we're going to use another primitive, a cylinder. I can tab back to object mode and go to the add menu to choose mesh cylinder, or you can hit the hotkey Shift A, brings up the exact same menu. I'm looking for the mesh category and cylinder specifically. Now, before I do anything else, including move or scale or rotate, I have some creation specific options or operator specific options, because creating a cylinder is a Blender operation. And anytime you do a Blender operation, you get specific settings in this bottom left menu right here. You'll see it pop up and then disappear whenever you do another operation. And so I want to have access to these settings to establish a better primitive creation. And you'll see what I mean. I'm going to hit 3 on the number pad, which takes me to side orthographic view. And then I'm also going to go to wireframe. And to do that, I hit the Z hotkey and move my mouse over to wireframe. All right, so now we can see the cylinder. It has several segments. It has 32 segments, in fact. But I want to change the alignment for now, which means rotating in the y-axis 90 degrees. All right, so that puts our cylinder like this. And then I want to move it up in the z-axis. And then now that I'm positioning it, that's why I need the side orthographic view. I want the center of our cylinder to match the top edge of the treasure chest bottom. So let's move that up. And as you slide or move anything in Blender, or change a setting, like a number slider like we're doing, if it's too sensitive, you can always hold Shift and that will make it more precise. And so I'm holding Shift now and matching the center of our cylinder to the top edge. And you can probably see where I'm going with this, in that we will delete the bottom half of the cylinder, leaving us a nice rounded top to the treasure chest. But I've still got these options, and I want to change the radius to match the dimensions of the rectangle that we've already created. So about there. And then if I look from the front, I want to make sure that the depth is aligned as well. Just like that. Which actually 3.6 meters makes sense because we scaled 1.8. So let me just type that in precisely, 3.6. Excellent. And now the last thing we need to change is the number of vertices. So here we have a choice to make. You can see that the faceting in the cylinder will be great for creating the planks of our treasure chest, right? The treasure chest is not just solid wood, it's created from planks of wood that's built together to create our shape. And so if I lower this vertex count from 32, you'll see that the faceting gets broader, and this would essentially make our boards more broad. And so I actually want the value to be 16, okay? So this will establish a good size for the boards that will make up our treasure chest. And at this point, I'm finally done with the creation of the cylinder, so we can minimize that menu. And then I can tab into edit mode and get rid of the end faces. I guess I could have done that from the add menu as well, but I did not. And then I want to delete the bottom half, switching over to vertices, and then go to wireframe mode. The reason I go to wireframe mode is I want to select the front and back vertex. So you can see I selected, but in the orthographic view, it looks like it's not selected. So by going to wireframe, I can B box select. That is the B hotkey, as in, well, you saw it in the bottom right corner, B as in boy. And now I've got all those elements selected. I can hit X and delete those vertices. All right, now we're left with just the top half. And I can fill the sides now, just being a half circle shape, by selecting two vertices and hitting the F key. All right, this is our fill option. Now, Blender has a default fill operator that you just saw, but there's a default add-on that's disabled out of the box, but is included with Blender. And if we enable that, it's called F2, and it is a much better fill operator. So I am going to enable that right now. In the add-ons section, I can search for F2. We will enable that. I will also save my current state of the preferences, so that's always enabled when I start Blender. And now when I hit F, you'll see that it fills the next available face in the direction that my mouse is, okay? So if I hold my mouse down, it will fill the other direction, but if I hold it up, it will fill along my half circle. And then for the last one, I'm going to select these top three verts and fill that as well. And this represents 3 new board planks. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Fill with F, F, and then select these final 3 and hit F. The reason I have to select those final 3 is by hitting F again, it will leave me with a tiny triangle, which I don't want. I instead just will fill the whole thing. There we go. Now it's the right kind of width to represent our board plank. All right, so we've got the basic shape of our cylinder. I'm sorry, not a cylinder, our treasure chest, using a cylindrical primitive and a cube primitive. But now we're ready to expand and add more detail and actually create the shapes that make up the box, okay? Like I've already said, it's not solid wood, it's made out of planks. We've kind of established that already on the upper half, but now we need to do it for the bottom half. And so I will select the bottom cube, tab into edit mode again, and we need to cut what are called edge loops. And in your tool panel, you have the option called loop cut right here. Again, being a hotkey person, I like the Control R hotkey. So I'm going to hit Control R, and then when you hover over faces, you see this yellow line indicating where a new edge would be cut. Now, if I scroll my mouse wheel, that will increase the number of cuts. And you can start to see where the number of cuts can create our plank pattern. All right, so if I use 3, for example, and cut it there, and then right click, let me do that one more time, because Control R, cut 3 loops, and now I can actually move these loops up and down, but I don't want to make that transformation. I will right click to cancel that part of the operation. So now I've got 4 evenly spaced faces that represent the wooden planks that will make up our treasure chest. All right, so for the bottom, I need to approach this a little differently because I don't want to cut edge loops along these other faces. That's just unnecessary geometry. I only want to cut it on the bottom. So I need to split apart this face from the rest of the mesh, which I can do with the Y hotkey. Okay, press Y and then G to move it, and you can see that it's no longer attached to the rest of the mesh. And now that it's not attached, I can hit Control R and cut 3 edge loops on the bottom face. Okay, so now we've got boards running this way as well. All right, so we've got the edge loops cut. Now we need to separate them out into their own individual faces. We'll do that like we just did with the Y hotkey. I need to select one by one and hit Y, Y, Y. And then the last one we don't need to because it's already its own face. Do the same thing for everything else. Y, Y, Y. And now we've got our planks individually separated, but they're paper thin. Let me hide this object up here for a second. It's called cylinder. We can either turn it off with the I icon over here, or you can hit the H key in object mode. Select it, hit H. That will hide it. And now looking at just our the bottom half of the treasure chest, you can see that our planks are paper thin, and we need to start adding thickness. So I can select everything in edit mode with the A hotkey and hit the E hotkey to extrude our faces out. Extrude, just like a pasta maker, is adding thickness into a certain direction. Now, by default, it kind of moves all the faces in a single axis, which is not what we want. So having hit the E key, I will then right click to cancel any kind of movement that is there by default. And I still extruded. If I hit the G key and move it around, you can see that. But while this certain selection is still available, I want to hit Alt and S. Okay, that will move our selected mesh components along the face normal. As I move my mouse wheel, you can see that the thickness is increasing or decreasing, or going in the opposite direction. In this case, I want to move the thickness inward to about something like that. It's not something that needs to be perfect, but just needs to make a little bit of sense. And I think that makes sense for wood planks. All right, so to go over that again, because the extrusion part can be a little weird, I'm going to select everything, E to extrude, and then immediately right click to cancel that extra movement, and then Alt S, and I can create my thickness as desired. All right, so this is great. We are one step closer to having a true dimensional version of our box as it would be constructed in real life. Now, we do have a problem because the extrusion is intersecting right now. And I need to make either the front boards or the side boards fit within the other, okay? So I'm gonna choose the side in this situation. And I wanna select all of the mesh components that are connected, or a mesh island as it's called. And to select an entire island in one hotkey, hover over a part of the mesh and hit L. All right, that will select the linked island. And that's perfect for our individual boards. So I'll just hover over each piece and hit L on the other side as well. And I want to scale in the Y-axis and line it up exactly with the front boards, the backside of the front boards. Now, if you're a true 3D modeler, you will want that to be perfect, not just close, but perfect. And 3D modeling is heaven for your perfectionism, or hell, depending on how you look at it. And if we want it to be perfect, we can instead use the snapping option. So I hit Control Z to undo that. And the snapping options can be found near the magnet icon. We can either enable them globally by turning that toggle on. I prefer to keep it off, and you can enable snapping in a transformative operation. If I hit G, and I'm moving, and then hold Control, and it will start snapping to various parts of the mesh. Now, the default is using incremental snapping based on the grid floor. I want to use vertex snapping. And also, I want to affect rotate and scale. Well, it's definitely scale. Let's turn off rotate, I guess, until we need it. But at this operation, I'm going to use scale with the S hotkey in the Y-axis again, and then holding Control, I can snap directly to that point. Okay, so that's great. I need to do the same thing on the bottom. Select just these mesh components. Also, to deselect, I don't know if I've said that yet, but that is hitting the A key twice pretty quickly. All right, so A once selects everything, A twice deselects everything. And then L to select mesh islands, same thing, S, Y, and then hold Control and snap it for a perfect scaling value. And then we've got another issue between the bottom and the side. So I'm going to decide to shrink the side panels upward just a little bit. So once again, deselect everything, L, 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 L. Okay, now I'm going to scale in the Z-axis, but we get a problem. We're scaling on the bottom, which is what I want, but we're also scaling on the top. Now I can actually scale according to the top edge as long as my active component is one of those top edges, which in this case it is. It's that white element. Anything that's selected in white is your active component. And if we choose edges specifically or vertices specifically, I can shift click on that vertex at the top and then change our snapping, or rather our pivot point, to be active element. Okay, now when we scale, we're scaling towards that top edge, and I can hit S, Z, and Control to snap to the bottom right there, okay? So now we've got perfect, precise modeling. You can feel good about the precision of that. I know as a modeler that is important. So next thing I want to do, little tiny detail, is move these faces inward. So these planks rather. So go to my face selection, which is also available up here. I like to use the 1, 2, and 3 hotkeys, but they're also selectable with the mouse up here. So let's select these side panels by themselves first and move in X. Let's see how far. If I look in the upper left corner up here, I'm going to follow my icon, not the mesh elements I'm moving. You can see that the distance is changing dynamically. So, you know, keep an eye on that. Let me cancel that operation real quick. Keep an eye on that, and I can type in a very specific value if I want. So I'm pretty close to negative 0.05. Let's just type that in, negative 0.05. All right. And remember that value because I'm going to do the opposite on the other side. GX, instead of negative, let's go 0.05. All right. So now that gives me a nice little decorative edge, so to speak. It's probably functional too. I've never built a wood chest, but I would imagine that's functional. And it also breaks up the surface a little bit. You know, it's not entirely even and perfect. So on the note of being perfectionist, that definitely has its time and place, but perfection is often unbelievable. So now I'm transitioning into some artistic advice, which segues into adding detail to our shapes. But I want to keep in mind that eliminating perfection is going to be good for the artistic quality and the believability. So just store that away in the back of your mind, because once we start detailing, it's going to be much more important. But for now, everything perfect is fine. We're close to a stopping point. I just need to do the same thing for the top half of our chest. So let's bring that back using the, in the outliner up here, we can see that cylinder is grayed out and hidden. So I can enable that again and select it, then tab into edit mode. And the same sort of thing, I'm going to select each face and hit Y to separate it. I'm going to start with these side pieces. And then I'm actually going to create the thickness before I separate these faces going around the rounded shape. So I'm going to select everything right now, go to wireframe, and I'll show you why I'm going to do this. I'm going to E to extrude again, right click to cancel any transformation, Alt S to scale. All right, so I'm going to line up that thickness according to the thickness of our the bottom part of our chest. I think that looks pretty good. If it's a little imperfect, which I feel like maybe it is slightly different, you know, I can open up that last operator properties panel and then shift and move that ever so slightly, something like that. And the reason I decided to do that before separating my planks is now all of my planks will have this angle to it right here. That angle is pretty important because if I separated the planks, there would be intersection like this. And so I wanted to avoid that intersection, and I decided to extrude it while it was still connected. However, this adds one more step. If I just select this part of the mesh and then hit Shift H, that will hide everything that's not selected. I need to separate these planks and then fill a face or two faces. So I need to select, to do this as quickly as possible, I can hold the Alt key and then click on, well, that's in edge mode. And so, well, Alt will click an edge loop. You know how we cut edge loops for the bottom? You can select edge loops holding Alt and clicking. Also in various mesh component selection types. So go to face and doing the same thing, Alt clicking. Now it selects that row of edge loops. All right, this is great for our planks. I can do that and then hit Y to separate it. Do that all the way down the line until I get to the last one, because that has an additional face on it. So the last one, if I hit L to select the island, that's actually fine. And on the front, that's actually fine too. But I need to fill one extra face. If I move this out of the way, since they were connected, it doesn't automatically fill that face whenever we separate. So I need to do this manually. And the way I will do it, it's not terribly quick, but that's okay. We'll just select the island and then Shift H to hide everything else. Go to Edge Selection, and then I can fill. All right, so select two faces, or really just one face, I guess, using F2, and you can fill. All right, that's what I need to do for the rest of these pieces. So select, hide everything else, fill the faces. Alt H brings everything back. And let's try, by the way, Shift L will deselect an entire island. And I will just quickly fill the rest of these faces. Okay, now everything has thickness and everything's separated into their own boards. Now that was a little bit more tedious than the bottom half of the chest, and really I only did it because I wanted these angles to match up perfectly. And so to me that was worth it, but it is a little bit of that perfectionistic stuff that I was talking about, not wanting them to intersect, because that's not what things do in reality. Anyway, the only thing left to do is to, speaking of intersection, is to fix the intersections on these side boards. So let me go to face mode and then select these islands. And then inside orthographic, I can scale, maybe just scale the whole thing down towards the active element like we did earlier. So let's go to edge selection, make that edge right there, make that the active element, make sure that our pivot is still set to active element. Then we should be able to scale down, which we are. Yeah, okay, great. We're going to be able to align these boards with the internal edge of the other faces. If that makes sense, the other boards. However, as I scale, it's bringing the other boards across our chest in an undesired way. So we just need to tell it to scale in every axis except X specifically, right? We do not want it to go in this direction. In order to do that, we can hit S and then Shift X. That means scale in every axis other than X. And then we can align that as such. Okay, so we've got the essential structure of our chest completed. Aside from perhaps moving these blocks right here, move it in X. What is it, negative 0.05? Yeah, that's what it was. Do the same thing on the other side. The opposite, GX 0.05. Okay, excellent. Now we've got the essential wooden shapes of our treasure chest. And this essential shape is called a blockout. It's best to block out all of your shapes before you move on to the detailing phase. So we've got our wooden blockout. We need to then block out the metal portions before we add final details. So we will add those metal blockout pieces in the next video.